great lineup actually throughout the whole semester.
Yeah.
We'll have Jason here today. Dr. Douglas is going to talk to us about some work that he's done very recently. But before we get into kind of an intro for Dr. Douglas, just briefly take a look at the seminar schedule that I have here. I've circulated it to most folks who needed to see it. Just a quick note that next week there is no seminar, but pretty much throughout the rest of the schedule there will be a meeting every Wednesday. And this is somewhat preliminary because we'll probably add a few master's thesis defenses in toward the end of the semester, and they're probably going to be on Mondays to fill out the schedule. So, but right here we already have 11 talks scheduled. One title has to come in, but that'll come in next week. And just the other thing to note here is that the next time we meet, which will be 2 weeks from now, we're going to be meeting in a special hall, which is one of the main halls, I think, over in engineering, where Dr. O'Malley is going to be giving a talk to green engineering class. All of us will benefit from learning about her research there. So let me just introduce Dr. Douglas here. So it's my pleasure to introduce really our newest colleague here in environmental studies. We're really excited that he's here with us, and we're going to learn a lot from him today and throughout his time here. He comes to us from the Center for Urban Resilience in Los Angeles. Resilience being kind of this key concept that we have embedded in sustainability, right? The ability to recover and be, withstand a lot of the implications that our decisions we have on the environment. And that's at Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles. He earned a Ph.D. in environmental psychology at the Graduate School and University Center, City University of New York, the CUNY system. This is the biggest university system in the United States? It is, right? Extensive campuses throughout. I spent a lot of time living in Jersey City, so I knew lots of folks who went to that school, and very, very high quality research that comes out of there. He has an MA in psychology and animal behavior from Hunter College, which is another CUNY campus. Yes. And then he has a BA in psychology from Stony Brook, which is another SUNY school. So, Stony Brook.
All about the
shout out for Stony Brook. So, in addition to all of the work you're going to hear about today, he's done extensive research in Jamaica, and he's worked on environmental justice issues in Los Angeles, in New York City, and he's going to help us through his time here at San Jose State learn about environmental justice issues here. Yep. So, always feel free to ask him lots of questions. So, please join me in offering a warm welcome to Dr. Jason Douglas.
Oh boy, good timing. There we go. Okay.
He's also going to teach some of us old dinosaurs how to use Prezi. This is very, very sleek and elegant way of presenting talks.
So, hi everybody, and thank you so much for inviting me here today. This is, I'm really excited to do this presentation again. Like, what, again? I actually did this presentation for my job talk when I interviewed here. So, I thought it would be such a good way to sort of introduce, the type of research that I do to everybody, and sort of, give you an idea of where I'm trying to take it, in San Jose. But what's really cool about it, when I did this, it did not say assistant professor there. And I'm so excited that it does now. Got the job, I'm here, super excited to work with, groups of students that I'm meeting here that are definitely passionate about environmental issues. Working with Patty already as my TA, Carly's taking one of my classes, and I look forward to getting to know the rest of you and what your research interests are, what your passions are, what you're all about. So I'm going to be talking to you a little bit today about some research that I did with young people in New York City, looking at inequitable access to green space. What were these green space inequities in New York? Why did they come about? And we did this in a participatory action research context. But before I really get to any of that, Dustin, thanks. You did a great job of introducing me. I just want to give you a little bit more of my background, if that's okay. So, as Dustin already said, I did my BA at Stony Brook Psychology, MA in Animal Behavior at Hunter, Ph.D. at CUNY, and also worked in the Center for Urban Resilience, and as well as the Psychology Applied Research Center at Loyola Marymount University. And throughout the course of my work across these centers and programs, I changed. I began to think about the different types of research, the different interests that I had. So after I finished my bachelor's degree at Stony Brook, I was studying, I'll back up for that. I was studying neuropsychopharmacology. And I thought it was interesting at the time. But I was really looking at precursors for autism. So I was working a lot with animal populations. And to be quite frank, once I got to the end of my degree, I actually didn't really feel very good about my research. So I took some time off. I traveled, went around the world, learned about different places, really sort of picked up on what I wanted to do. See the world, look around, learn about different things, figure out where I might be able to make an impact somehow. And that brought me to my master's degree, where I'll begin a story. As I pursued my travels, I became increasingly concerned with conservation issues, biodiversity loss, deforestation, several issues, and I said, well, a great way to begin to think about this would be in the context of animal behavior. I wanted to see how systems were impacting different species. So it all started with a bonobo chimpanzee. Anybody here familiar with bonobos? Show of hands. Okay, they are our closest living relative. We share about 99.8% of the same DNA. One strand goes this way and you've got a person, basically. So I was studying play behavior and doing comparative studies between captivity and the wild, looking for these differences. And we found some interesting things in these studies, but as I was working with captive populations, I began to think more and more. I said, hey, listen, if you're really interested in what's happening to these animals, maybe we should begin to think about people. And that led me to my Ph.D. at CUNY, where I pursued a degree in environmental psychology, and I was really interested in learning more about the human relationship with nature. How do people think and feel about the environments around them? How do people think and feel about these broad-scale environmental issues that we're faced with on an everyday basis, both locally and globally? After this, I pushed forward, and this story is really about the research that I engaged in and how the people, spaces, places, and animals that I worked with really shaped my trajectory. How I began to think about the research that I was engaging in. So I pushed forward, and this research took me to different areas, including environmental justice and political ecology, where I looked at access to resources, environmental determinants of public health inequities, which is where I firmly landed. This is where my research is now, and I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit more about that. So in this, a little bit about my research. The first project that I did, in the PhD program at CUNY, we're required to do basically two broad-scale research projects. One is a second-year doctoral research program, which basically is the equivalent of a master's thesis. And in this, I was, really lucky. Now, I had this idea. I was like, let's look at institutional impact on young people's relationship with nature. So I thought, what a great idea. Let's look at the impact of zoos, community gardens, parks, etc., on how young people think and feel about nature. So I was a first-year doctoral student, and one of my colleagues came up to me. They're like, oh, this study sounds really interesting. You need to apply for this grant to the Bound Foundation. They're interested in some of these issues. So I was so lucky. I applied, got the application in. I think it was due like November 1st at 5 p.m. It went in at November 1st at 4:59 p.m. And 2 weeks later, I got a congratulations letter. So I got funding to do this project. And I learned so many interesting things about how engagement with these different urban institutions impacts young people's relationship with nature. And that was great. But one of the biggest things that come out of this for me was spending time with these young people. we would visit zoos, we would go to environmental education programs at zoos, we would go to community gardens. But there was one day we just went out to have a critical discussion about the environment, about what they were seeing in their neighborhoods in a local park. And I asked them, I was like, well, how are some of these issues that you're seeing affecting animals? And it was great. They would name all sorts of things and say, listen, we're seeing pollution, we're seeing solid waste, things that are affecting animals. They would name the things that we typically see in the news. Those soda six-pack rings caught over birds' heads, plastic bags, birds, different animals eating bits of plastic and how it would affect them. But what really took me, what surprised me, this blew me off my feet, is how they began to take that knowledge, that learning, and transfer it to their own lives. And they would call me Mr. Jason, right? And they got so excited. In this conversation, they came to me and they were like, Mr. Jason, this is great, but you know what? If this place is not safe for animals, it's not safe for us either. And it's not safe for our families. So as I began to think about that, I said, okay, I need to broaden my perspective and think about people and the environment. And this led me to my next project, a Youth Participatory Action Research project, which was sponsored by a great program. I participated in a National Science Foundation GK-12 fellowship, which I'm going to get into. This is going to be the focus of our talk. And that led to some other research in participatory forest conservation in Jamaica, also sponsored by the NSF, and extensive community-based participatory research concerning public health, which I continue through my postdoc and I'm continuing here in San Jose. So, working with these young people, it really increased my interest in social and environmental inequities for us, for all species. So I did the research, and I encourage you to do this here. Before I began to work with, in a research context, I read and read and read, and really learned more about some of the issues that we're experiencing in New York City at the time, as well as in Los Angeles as I continued my work. So, I looked at green space inequities, food resources, health. So green space, it's argued that green space is inequitably distributed by race, by class, in many different areas. One study that I reference quite frequently is based in Los Angeles, really split this up and argued that parks are inequitably distributed by race. They skipped the class part of it. They said, let's just look at racial characteristics, ethnodiversity, and how this factors into people's access to green space. So let's split it up. Walsh et al., they decided to split this up for the purposes of this talk. Let's consider, Latino, African American, and predominantly Caucasian areas, right? Now, federal guidelines stipulate that per 1,000 people of the population, there should be roughly 10 to 12 acres of green space accessible within a half mile of your home. And this is for various reasons, for exercise, there's psychological implications, go on and on down the line. The usefulness, the importance of access to green space goes across the board. So let's try this out. Help me out a little bit. Again, 10 to 12 acres of green space per 1,000 people of the population. In Los Angeles, areas that are 70% or more Latino, how many acres of green space do you think are available per 1,000 people of the population? Help me out. Just give me some random guesses.
I would say less than one.
Less than one? What else we got? One?
Less than that.
Less than?
Even
Less than one?
Yeah. Middle space.
Okay. Latinos. You all nailed it. 0.7 acres. Okay, areas that are 75% or more African American. What do you think?
I would say even less. Maybe a quarter.
Okay, quarter. What else? Give me a couple more.
30%. Or not 30, 1/3 of an acre.
1/3 of an acre. Okay. What do you think?
Does this include city parks as well?
Yeah.
Like green parks?
Yeah.
Any surrounding space?
green space? 3 acres. Carly, you've been waiting for these numbers. What do you think?
0.47.
0.47. Everybody thinks that we get, really get the short end of the stick. We actually did a little bit better. We got 1.6. Okay. And areas that are 75% or more Caucasian in Los Angeles. How many acres of green space per 1,000 people of population?
A lot.
A lot. Okay, that's it. That's a fair guess. I'm gonna go with that. Well, what do you think? How many acres? 5 acres. What do you think?
7.
7 acres. Give me one more.
What was the minimum though that you have to have?
What was the
10 to 12.
I'd say about like 9.
Okay. Take a deep breath. Exhale. 31.2. Okay. Clearly there's, a vast inequity here concerning green space accessibility. Food resources. We know that access to healthy food in low-income and communities of color is also inaccessible. I took some of my students on a tour of South Los Angeles. South Los Angeles, predominantly Black and Latino, comprised of, lower income groups. I took them on a tour. We decided to do an environmental justice tour. And, my students were blown away as we drove through the corridors there, and they would see on every corner a fast food restaurant, a liquor store. Hey, there's no Whole Foods to be found. There, few farmers markets. So what are we eating in these communities? This is a huge concern for us. Health. The first two were directly linked to young people's health, to all people's health in these communities. We know that in Black and Latino communities, upwards of 39% of youth are either overweight or obese. This is massive. So listen, the theories are forming, and they're well-founded, that environmental factors certainly do contribute to racial and ethnic health disparities. We're seeing this across the board. So in thinking about these things, I was invited as a National Science Foundation GK through 12 fellow to work in an environmental education context with a school in Northwest Manhattan, Northeast Manhattan, sorry. And, I met with an urban ecology class to discuss what their interests were, what they were doing. They said, listen, we just want, a graduate student to come and work with us and share some of your expertise. So, in doing this, hearing some of the students' ideas, the teachers' ideas that were working with this class, they certainly had a social justice frame where they were talking about issues. They were talking about, who gets access to rivers and waterways. They were talking about nature. So they began to think about this, and in the research context, I thought this would be a great opportunity. This was not my dissertation. This wasn't even my second year doctoral project. This was just me working with students. And I thought it would be a great opportunity to learn about young people's material and conceptual remaking of nature through environmental research. Look at how their engagement in research actually affects how they think and feel about the world around them, the environments around them. But also something that is hinged on community engagement, as well as pushing an environment where we could together just develop a sense of stewardship. So theoretical foundations, I've been working with these theories since I had started my Ph.D. and before, and I've hinged this projects on 4 foundations. One is situated knowledge. And that's where Laban Wenger argued that knowledge is developed within the context of people's everyday lives. They were looking at educational environments and said, the classroom is great, and we can learn a lot of great things there. But real knowledge is produced in the environment, outside, in young people's active engagement with systems around them. And this is dovetailed by activity theory. stemming from Vygotsky's work on socially mediated learning, whereby we understand that, activities, the activities that we engage in are not these discrete, unconnected events, but it's continuing activities and engaging in activity systems where we develop our knowledge, our understanding. Also in transactionalism, where we understand that knowledge is produced and reproduced in the ongoing and indeterminate transactions between the knower and the known. That is, people and the world around us, our immediate environment. And I was also interested in looking at attitudes toward nature, like Keller's thesis. So I hinged all of this, I had several research questions, but I hinged all of this on one broad, overarching research question. How does youth engagement in environmental research affect their sense of responsibility to the environment? So I had to develop some sort of research methods for doing this, right? Could just go off on Unhinged. So I worked with 18 ethnoculturally diverse youth, ranging from 15 to 17 years of age, in what I thought would be a great methodology to do so in this participatory action research context. They were engaged. They definitely had this sort of social justice frame to their thinking when I first met them. I said, okay, let's work together based on your interests. Less on mine, but we were aligned. And I would do participant observation. I introduced a web-based learning environment called Moodle, Modular Object-Oriented Dynamic Learning Environment, because I only saw these students once, sometimes twice a week, but since they were actively engaged in ongoing research daily, this was a way that I could actually communicate with them every day. And we developed this as a writing intensive program. We wanted students to go through this and continually write about what they were experiencing, what they were seeing. And I also interviewed them. So what is participatory action research? Who's heard of this research paradigm before? Okay, we've got a couple. Great. I'm just going to hand this over and just kidding. Okay.
I never heard of it.
So participatory action research is, it's a methodology of working in and with community, whereby, academics, professionals, we bring knowledge of research methods, we bring knowledge of, how to go about research, how to connect with political systems, so on and so forth. But we really see community members as the experts. They're the ones that have the true knowledge, this situated knowledge, if you will, of what is happening on the ground. Oops, sorry. They know the real events of their neighborhoods. I don't know this. I didn't live in Northeast Harlem at the time. I lived in Brooklyn. Right? I can tell you a lot about Brooklyn, but Northeast Harlem, I didn't know what it was like to walk on the street at night. I didn't know what it was like to get to a park. So participatory action research is hinged on, an ongoing process. It's cyclical, right? But it doesn't have an end point, per se. We always have a start point, starting with reflection, moving to planning, research, and action, and then back to reflection, back to planning, back to research and action. It's an ongoing process, which I'll explain in context. So I met with the students again, and to get to really drill down on what they were interested in doing in this program, I introduced an activity, which subsequently many of my students have been exposed to at San Jose too, because I use this as a way to get to know y'all and figure out what you guys want to do research in, how I can actually work with you, how I can help. And I call this activity the geographical imagining. And in this activity, I ask the people that I'm working with to think about the perfect place to live, the ideal neighborhood, right? What it looks like, geographically, socially, etc. And then I ask them to pit this against their geographical reality. Where do they live? What does their neighborhood look like? How does this compare with where they are? So the students that I work with, their realities, were as follows. And I'm just going to read these for you. The neighborhood I live in has lots of corner stores, old people, former crack addicts. My neighborhood's not clean, litter's present everywhere, even though there's a garbage can on every street. People are rowdy, crime is prevalent, older men are perverted. I live across from a shelter for men. I'm awakened by the sound of gunshots, and there's no fresh air. My mom can't breathe when she goes outside. So what did their imaginaries look like? Well, here we go. Our neighborhood would be composed of parks with bright flowers, places to go hiking, rowboating, etc. It will have lots of room to have fun, and we'll have a playground so children can play. Lots of trees and parks. There will be great big flowers, all types of colors, summertime, trees, green grass, all day, every day. Do you see a theme here, folks? All I asked them to do was think about, I told them, I was like, you could describe Disneyland if you want to. I don't care. Just, I want to know what your ideal place to live is. Doesn't this sound like a place where we should all have access to? I think so. So, through this discussion, we agreed. You know, you're all aligned. There's certainly a theme here. Y'all are thinking about green space. You're all thinking about, you know, trees and green. And in the urban context, where do we see the most accessible green spaces? Parks, community gardens. You know, back in New York, we all lived in apartment buildings. We didn't have lawns, right? So we moved into the next phase, planning. And in this, the students, they, again, these are young high school kids. They did literature reviews. They read peer-reviewed journal articles, and they unpacked them. And I think it was this, you know, these students, they had never even heard of peer-reviewed articles before, so when we handed them out, they just thought it was another reading. And they went through it, they're like, I don't know that word, but whatever. And they got to the end of the thing, they're like, yeah, I can tell you what this is all about. So they read about green space distribution. They read about methodologies for actually studying green space distribution. We collaboratively developed research questions to address this issue and methods, and pulled out of our readings instruments that we thought would be useful, and ended up developing some of our own instruments. And this is a map of green space distribution in New York City. All of you know, green space in New York is actually very well distributed. What we call green space, anyway. So I'll get to that. Keep that in your head, what we call green space. So we're in Northeast Manhattan, right along the waterway. It looks fantastic. From there, we moved into the next phase. We conducted research. So what did we do? The students took field notes. We, you know, in this process, we were studying access to various parks in northern Manhattan. But there was a park near our school community. And one of the things that the students said is, you know, nobody's using this. So we agreed to hone in on this one space and figure out what was going on there. What was it all about? I mean, this was the green space for the community in this school area. So, and I don't expect you to read this. 1, 2, don't ever put this many words on your slides. It's impossible, you can't expect it, but I'll just summarize some of this for you. So this is both what they did, and I'm sharing some of my data with you. So let's note, this project, I collected predominantly qualitative data from the students, which then I'll show you how I took that and, based on what they showed me, developed quantitative measures for continuing this kind of work. So they documented green space accessibility. So we looked at this park, and they said, listen, it's difficult to find. You can't see it. It was on the other side of a highway. So to get there, it was really difficult. I had to walk up a ramp, and basically they're saying nobody would know this park is here. It's hidden. Furthermore, they said when they tried to get to the park, there's no crossing sign. They had to cross the exit ramp of a highway to get to this park. I was with them that day. We were walking across, this car comes flying off the exit ramp, and we all jump back in the car, the curb. Holy cow. Like, this is how we expect young people in New York to get to a park in their community? This is ridiculous. So they documented this, and they document many different things about the park. It was fascinating. They did mapping. They mapped the distribution of green space in their areas, and they linked that to socioeconomic characteristics, right? Median household income. And looked at, the distribution of these green spaces according to these characteristics. They dug up maps of the park where we were actually doing research. They, documented green space distribution, and when we were doing our research in this particular park, they actually developed behavior maps. Anyone here ever heard of a behavior map? They mapped out physical parameters of the environment. They mapped out what people, what they observed, what people were doing in the different areas of the park. They mapped out the distribution of litter, and they also mapped out the distribution of litter receptacles, amongst other things. Okay, so again, participatory action research is cyclical, it's ongoing. And there are moments, it is not you don't just go into the field, do the research, stop, and write a paper, and you're done. This is all about doing something. It's all about action. So there are moments throughout the process where you begin to say, hey, let's show people what we're doing. So the high school teacher, unbeknownst to me, I didn't even know this was happening, was taking those field notes that the students were documenting and sending them to someone that had a stake in this park, a gentleman named Richard Toussaint. He was an architect, still is. And he had a dream of bringing a park to this neighborhood, right? The Harlem River Park, where we were doing our research. So he sent their field notes. We were out in the field one day, and they were doing some more field notes, and the students just ran into Richard Toussaint. And he said, hey, listen, you know what? I got your notes. And what we did is we decided to open up new entrances to this park because we didn't even know that it was difficult for people to get here. The young people in this program heard this and they're like, really? Hold on, we went out into the world, we documented something, we showed it to someone, and it actually made a difference. So they said it was much easier to get there. And once they got to the park, we went through another route, no cars were running us over, this was great. Once we got to the park, they looked around, they compared it with their initial maps, and they said, oh, we're seeing a lot more litter receptacles, garbage cans, around the areas where we said trash was collecting. And they said, hey, this isn't rocket science, you put a garbage can here, maybe someone will use it. Okay. So this one moment, it was so promising, they actually began to make change early in the research process. So we forged on. The students went out into the community and said, hey, let's survey community members and take a look about, at how they think and feel about green space accessibility in their community. So they developed the What's Good Green Swag survey. And, they were asking about household income, why people go to parks, and really any barriers. They surveyed 77 community members, ages 14 to 63. And broadly speaking, they found that there was a community-wide dissatisfaction with green space, both quality and accessibility. In terms of quality, they said, listen, we want more green. We want more nature parks. Remember I showed you that map of green space distribution in New York City? It actually looks pretty good. And quantitatively speaking, green space is very equitably distributed in New York. But it's just not green. Many of our parks are what are called parks are handball courts, basketball courts, right? Not what we would definitely necessarily call a park. They wanted less concrete. But as we drill down further and further, they said accessibility is a huge issue. We're seeing crime in our parks. We're seeing we don't feel safe. And it was so sad that we had to experience this together. The young people that I was working on this project with, we would go into parks, and I'd read their field notes. One set came back one day, and they said, "Oh, we saw some suspicious-looking people hovering under an overpass, and they had some white powder in their hands." It's sad, but these are the realities of what young people are seeing in their everyday lives. And these are I'm glad that we worked together and we found these things. We saw them and we began to unpack them together. So, the next part, action. What do we do with all this research? Well, the students, they did a great job and they put together presentations based on some of this data that I just shared with you. And they did presentations for people that had a stake in bringing green space to Harlem and had a stake in the specific park. So they presented their work to the Harlem Community Development Corporation. They presented it to Harlem Community Board meetings, right? And they also did research presentations at the park itself to inform community members of what they were finding. Now, when they did this, these are some people from the Harlem Community Development Corporation. They started grilling these people. They're like, listen, you know, y'all have this idea of what parks should be in our community, but this is not what our community members are saying. If you want to develop spaces and places that are amenable to community needs, guess what? Maybe you should ask community. We did. And here's the data. Oops. And based on that, and meeting with all these different organizations and going on and up the political ladder, these students were invited to participate in further designing the Harlem River Park according to the needs of the community. A huge win, right? Some of you all might ask, how do we actually engage community members to make change? Science is a powerful and effective tool, and these students harnessed that. They leveraged it to make change in their own community. And that was great. But what happened to the students? Well, we came back to the reflection phase again. And, you know, when I first went into this project, I thought it would be great if we could work with young people to really push them to develop a sense of stewardship. But I didn't imagine. And this is the beautiful thing, when you first go into a project and you have no idea, you know, it hasn't really been done that much before, you go in with a qualitative approach, you're open to learn so many different things. And again, I don't expect you to read these slides, but what I'm doing is trying to characterize how the conversations went on Moodle. This is our online learning environment. I was amazed to see that these students really began to develop a sense of self and collective efficacy. That is, an understanding that they actually have an ability to produce change both individually and collectively by working with the communities that they live in and around, by working with their cohorts, by working with people that have an expertise in social and environmental research to help guide them through the process. Furthermore, they developed what's called a sense of community. That is, feeling in belonging with the people around you, the communities around you, your neighbors, and developing even a sense of place attachment. So I'm just going to summarize some of these for you. Students said, you know, from coming to this class, I had no care for the community at all until I was introduced to this project. And they learned more about how helping and working in and around your community can actually help to improve it, and your school. They formed these narratives, these ongoing conversations where they would say, you know, I agree with you. I've come more to appreciate the spaces and places around me. Others talked about how they were ashamed of their ignorance, about, you know, their lack of knowledge about the environment and the health risks that are associated with some of the inequities that we're seeing. For many, this was their first time being active in the community. And they were so proud to work together to improve these places. To be open-minded, to learn new things, and to work together, and to find out that they could actually do this together. And it's all blurred out, because I can't have you say their names. But this is sort of what it looked like in the online learning exchange. Beyond this, the students developed a sense of empowerment. I say here, it surprised them that, you know, they had an opportunity to do this, and that people are really paying attention to what they're doing. But they knew that it was amazing that they could actually begin to make a change. Even if the broad scale changes wouldn't be immediate, they knew it would come down the line. So I've been talking a lot, and my throat's getting a little dry. So I'd like everybody, if you could just kind of come up a little bit. I'm going to make this as loud as possible. I apologize, we don't have speakers. But I want you to hear what they have to say.
We've got some empty seats in here, so feel free to grab one and roll forward.
And the speakers on this laptop are actually pretty good, so let's see if this works.
Well, I think that we actually care about what we think about the park, the way we want to design it, not only the way they want to design it. So that's in the community to help design the park.
Actually, just the young people get some input on the park that we use in our settings. So yeah, that would be cool, and think of some new and improved ideas that we know that we would use besides the basic things like a basketball court.
And also, we live in the community, so as part of the community, we have to give back. And this is a way, a device that we can use to give back. And also, since we live in the community, we know what the community will want. Our research would be important because we want to find out what we want in the park, what the community wants, and then like what's best for the park.
So that was difficult to hear, but they were talking about community the whole time. What the community wants, what the community needs, and how it's important that community engages in making these political decisions, in shaping the spaces and places around them to be amenable to what the community wants, not what somebody sitting in an ivory tower thinks that we should have. So in this, I argued that participatory action research is an effective method for researchers and community to work together in identifying and redressing environmental disparities. And that it's an empowering mode of engagement and knowledge production, as evidenced by these young people. Furthermore, I think it's imperative to develop community capacity to actually address the social and environmental inequities that they're faced with every day. And when I say develop community capacity through research methods, through developing community leaders, through developing people's capacity to engage with political and decision makers about what these places look like. Furthermore, it is imperative to foster interaction and collaboration amongst community members and these decision makers. And finally, youth engagement in environmental research can foster self and collective efficacy and a sense of responsibility to community and the broader environments. Not just the environment, but to the people around us too. And the reason I say can is, again, this was an isolated qualitative research project. I can't generalize this, right? Not yet. So what's next? Well, I continued my research in a participatory context. I did this project and I was sold. Like, we need to look at people's active participation in redressing the inequities they're faced with. So for my dissertation research, I worked in Jamaica, also sponsored by the NSF, looking at access to forest resources, right? Engaging in participatory forest conservation. Back to my research, coming all the way to the West Coast, where I pushed forward with community-based participatory action research focused on public health. Because this is the one thing that really began to stand out to me. What are we really talking about here, guys? We're talking about health. We're talking about people's psychological well-being. We're talking about people's everyday well-being. Access to resources. This is fundamentally linked to our broader well-being. So in this, I drilled down more. This is where we're at now. Looking at environmental determinants of public health inequities. I don't think the jury's out anymore, but we need to push forward and figure out what's what. So in LA, I continued working with young people in a participatory context, and from what I learned from those students in New York City, I said, great, that was a qualitative aspect, and I love qualitative research. I continue to do it with young people in LA, but I introduced quantitative measures, where we could actually measure a sense of community, measure self and collective efficacy, measure relationship with nature, and also juxtapose that with measures of cultural identity, right? I began to think, you know, how does the way we identify with our own cultures relate to these factors? And pushing further to broader community-based work with all age groups, sponsored by the CDC, I've been looking at racial and ethnic approaches to community health. And in this, we've worked with communities in South Los Angeles to develop various programs, including park prescriptions, where we literally work with clinicians who write prescriptions for community members, about, to go to a park, how long they should go there for, what kinds of activities they should engage in. This is really cool stuff. Safe passages. We worked with community members to document community assets and deficits through a participatory mapping process. We did this over a course of a few sessions, working with over 50 community members, using large table-sized 4x6 maps, and literally mapping what kept them out of their parks, and what made parks possibly accessible. Based on that session, we went off in another direction and actually did GIS analysis, looking at all of the assets and deficits in South Los Angeles. And we did an analysis of crime. Community members, they said, hey, you guys, it's great, we want to get to those parks, but what you need to think about is what's keeping us out. And what we're seeing a lot of is crime, and how crime is related to point locations in our neighborhoods that you need to analyze. And we did. And we went back to community and said, is this what you're talking about? And they said, yes, exactly. Now you get it, you silly researchers. They really taught us what we need to look at. Oh, I'm sorry, did you have a question?
Yeah, quick question. I was wondering, in your research, did you uncover any sort of interesting strategic plan, especially urban planning, in regard to, and I can't remember what research I read, it was centered around New York City Park recreation, and the information, the research reflected that, particularly among communities of color, there will be more concrete parks, basketball courts, because they're open spaces. Why are they open spaces? There's this partnership, collaboration between New York City Park and Restoration and the Police Department, because they need open spaces to keep an eye on certain demographics, which is an issue. Just like they do. So I think that's a very interesting point.
Yeah, and you know what? I agree. Park spaces do afford, spaces for subversive activities. However, what they completely ignored was they didn't think about the community aspect. Community policing, community engagement, and actually keeping their neighborhood safe. But once you take that away and install these concrete spaces that are governed more by political factions, city factions, you take that away from the community. This is what we need to start thinking about. And I think, participatory action research is a way of bringing that back and unpacking it and say, these are community spaces. It's a way of empowering community members to say, this is what we want. And we can actually look out for these things. I mean, we even did a study working with homeless folk in South Los Angeles, where community members were saying, listen, we have many homeless residents in our area. They are actually part of our security force. You talk to most community members, they talk about homeless residents as if they're a nuisance. No, these are members of our community. So I think that's a great point, Robert. Thank you. As well as, we looked at access to healthcare. So here, I presented this when I did my job talk, a 5-year research plan. And this is what I want to talk to you all about, because this is what I'm thinking. And you're all graduate students. This is what I want you guys to get involved with me and the department more broadly. So I have been meeting with community-based organizations over the past few weeks since I got here. And developing wonderful relationships and talking to people, about some of the issues that we're experiencing in San Jose. And when I tell them about this type of stuff, and I was looking at access to green space and why people aren't using parks, people from these organizations were like, they're not using parks here either. And I meet with my students and I ask them, I'm like, so why aren't people using parks? And they started listing off all of these issues: crime, violence, right, drugs, so on and so forth. So why aren't we seeing this? Well, maybe we could start to figure this out together. Maybe some of us could work together to map out the distribution of green space. San Jose is supposed to have one of the best connected park systems in the country. Yet I'm meeting with people and they're like, connected, great, but nobody's using these spaces. So,
What do you mean by connected?
bike paths, trails, right? Easy to get to and from each one of these spaces? Good question. So my plan is to submit a research grant for working with some of the community-based organizations that I'm meeting up with, and they're all really excited about this. They say, let's go after this together and start to think about some of these issues in the context of San Jose, right? And I want to develop and refine community-based and culturally grounded, methodologies that are amenable to the needs of the people within and around San Jose communities. So in this, I'm developing a research lab. I already have a couple of people working with me. I will train you if you want to work with me. If you don't want to work with me, I'll train you anyway. Okay. But I will train you to conduct participatory action research towards addressing social and environmental inequities. You could want to do research on something completely unrelated, but if you think these methodologies will be useful for you, I want to work with you, okay? My interest is health, great, we can do whatever you want. But my objective is to conduct culturally grounded participatory research, utilizing both quantitative and qualitative measures. I think it's important, yes, to measure things. I mean, look, we live in a data-driven world, and people appreciate numbers, especially those that have the power to change the things that we're interested in. But I think it is necessary to document the context of what we're seeing, and that requires qualitative measures. I want to develop community-based strategies toward redressing environmental health inequities, and just like with those young people and so many communities that I've worked with, I want to work together toward empowerment, toward empowering marginalized communities. And then perhaps maybe together we can begin to produce youth engagement, broader community engagement, nature. This is a picture of some of the results at the park that the students were working on. And young people's knowledge and active engagement in redressing some of these issues that we see in our everyday lives. There's Manhattan. Some references if any of you need them. You got all of those, so we're good. Thank you very much.
Ready for a couple of questions.
We got about 15 minutes.
10-15 minutes, so have questions. Here's your chance.
I had to walk in on this one. I'm a student, I'm an alumni from Recreation Leisure Studies Department a few years back. And I worked at a park called Wonderlight Park and a park called Sawyer Camp Trail in San Mateo counties. And Sawyer Camp Trail was a 6-mile exercise trail. It was a paved highway. And we had a lot of problems with people accessing the roadway. And eventually they put in good law enforcement, good safety and security for people wanting to walk and hike and bicycle. And it made it mother-friendly. They could bring their kids in. And when we did that, then the trail became safe and more people would access it. I think we need to find mother-friendly parks that really fun.
I think that's a great comment, and I really appreciate that. There's one element that I'd like to add to that though. I talked to you all about the community-based participatory mapping session that we did in South LA. This is a great idea, creating this sort of mother-friendly park. However, this was something we learned from youth in Los Angeles. When we're mapping some of the deficits of getting to parks, they actually mapped sheriff locations. These are good kids, okay? I mean, these are kids that, are participating in a community-based organization, and they showed up and they said, we want to help you to learn more about what's going on in this community. And they said, listen, when we walk down to the park, this is what they said, this is really interesting. The girls would say, when we walk down to the park, we're all good, no problem. But when we walk down in a mixed group with our boyfriends, we invariably get stopped and frisked. And I don't want to go to this space anymore. The guys don't want to go to this place anymore because they're being treated like criminals in the streets. See, this is why it's imperative to work with community. They can teach us so much about what we're seeing. What I never would have thought that. So I really love your comments, and I think there's so much more, and we can really go further together. That was great. Thank you. Carly.
How long ago did you do the study?
This was in 2000. Well, the project wrapped up in 2010. It went from 2009 through late 2010. So it was almost a year and a half.
Do you know if any of the students ended up going into studying environmental subjects? If they were inspired by this project?
You know what? It's a great question. And when I did the job talk, somebody asked a very similar question, and I still have to follow up, but I have a plan. I have a book chapter right now going to print on this project, and I'm going to distribute it to everybody in the program. Everybody that participated, and say, hey, look, listen, this is what you signed off on. Tell me what you think. I want them to come back and say, tell me what they think about the thing, and just show them that, this could have some impact. We're going to educate more people about what we did together. So I think that's great, and that's part of the plan. Robert.
So I forgot my question.
It's okay.
Yeah, listen to what she has to say.
Oh, fantastic. Hi.
So this is why I asked you why, what the interconnections are in San Jose. 'Cause I wasn't even thinking what we use, but I mean, once you mentioned trails, we do have the Guadalupe River Creek Trail, which does connect to different to trails and parks. How can we get more people in San Jose to engage and realize that there are that interconnection? And also, how can we start using that design in San Jose in other cities in America?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great question. In realizing that they're well connected, I think we need to foster events that actually promote people's understanding of these spaces, but I think we need to scale back a little bit. We definitely need to get the message out there that they do exist, but I think what I'm learning so far is that people don't want to go to these places anyway, right? In many of them. And this is what I'm hearing anecdotally. I welcome y'all. Let's pick this up and figure it out together. Why aren't people using these places? But, so far I'm hearing, one person gave me an example of the jungle. Y'all heard of that? Right, Coyote Creek. There was a homeless encampment there, which was discouraging people from using these areas. These encampments have since dispersed. Rachel?
Well, the interesting thing about that, and it's something that has been very very prominent at San Jose State the last year, because we're getting involved with that specific issue, the jungle of Coyote Creek. And it reminds me inappropriately of an old joke that it's gotten so popular I don't want to go there anymore. In a sense, it is being used.
It is.
It is being used by homeless people.
Right.
It is not being used by everyone. But
Thank
it is in fact a draw. It is where humans want to be. And then some humans don't want it with other humans. And so then you get into a whole different level of why do these particular humans want to be there? What are they? How are they interacting with and benefiting from versus simply existing on? And so there's a really interesting multi-dimensional question that goes.
It's a resource that has conflict.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
It's an attractive place.
Absolutely.
And yet, it's not attractive for everyone. It's attractive, but there's conflict. And so trying to figure out how to move beyond places reserved for people who have power and assets, and move to a world where our natural spaces are shared with